What's up everyone, welcome to Workshop Rebuild. It's been quite some time since I've last uploaded a video, and that's because I ran into some issues while ordering parts from abroad. The parts that I ordered are coming from Germany, and instead of shipping those parts by air freight, which I thought they'd initially be shipped by, they're coming by sea freight, which will take much longer than initially expected. So the BMW R60/5 engine rebuild will be delayed until a further notice, or at least until I receive those parts and I can get organized and rebuild that engine for you guys on video. But in today's video, I will be working on the frame assembly of the BMW R60/5. Before mounting parts back onto this BMW motorcycle frame, I'll share with you guys all the parts that I laid out on both of these tables. On the left side of the screen, you'll see a lot of polished aluminum parts and a lot of cadmium plated parts that will make up the front end assembly. Over here, we also have the front shock absorbers. These were rebuilt in a previous video, and if you guys would like to see that, click the link up above. The finish that you guys see on the aluminum fork legs, which is the bottom portion of the shock absorber, is Cerakote Glacier Silver. And if you guys are interested in that product, check the link down below in the description. Now on the right side of the screen, I have another table full of parts. These are a little bit bigger, that's why it's separate from that table. But I have parts that have been freshly Cerakoted. This color is black velvet, just in case you are interested. Now right behind those parts, I have brand new rear shock absorbers from Icon. This is an aftermarket solution, and it is probably one of the better solutions. Now we also have the drive shaft, the swing arm, and this is actually one assembly. I'll be installing brand new bearings and seals into the swing arm, and then later on I'll be installing that drive shaft into the swing arm. The rear frame assembly will be mounted onto this frame as well, so the rear end will obviously be a little bit longer than what this frame actually is right now. And then we can also put one shock absorber on to keep everything in place. So I shared all the parts with you guys on these two tables. I'll start with the front end assembly of this motorcycle frame, and then I'll work my way to the back end, which is the rear frame, swing arm, and the shock absorbers. If you guys have any questions throughout this video, leave a comment down below. Like if you guys enjoy the content I share with you guys, and subscribe for more content. So let's get right to the assembly process. The two outer races are now punched into the main frame and everything looks really good. Now I'll grab my triple clamp and install one inner race of the taper bearing on this shaft, and then hopefully we can insert this onto the main frame. Tighten the split round nut on the top end, and both taper bearings feel really good. There's no excess play in them, and I hear them moving, or at least turning and rotating. Obviously right now I don't have the handlebars on there. If I put them on, it'll feel much different because I have more leverage on this rotating assembly. But right now I'm really happy with it, and I'm going to move along to the fork tube installation. So what that means is I'm going to take the fork tubes and install them into this lower triple clamp. Once I put the original fork boots onto the fork tubes, I noticed something was off, and it's funny I didn't notice this earlier. So I did some research online, and I figured out these are actually the wrong fork boots for a /5. These are the original, or the ones that just came off the bike. They were still in great condition, so I thought I could reuse them. I cleaned them up and I reconditioned them. But I figured out these are 11 ribs, and the /5 should actually have a 13 rib fork boot. So as you can see, I have brand new 13 rib fork boots from EME. These fit perfectly and they look a little bit better on this bike. So with that said, let's continue on with the front end assembly. The front end assembly is already getting pretty heavy for this makeshift stand, so I put some counterweight on the back end, and that will allow me to continue on with the handlebars and some of the other miscellaneous components. So let's get right to it. The front forks are almost complete. Now all I'd have to do is add 280 milliliters to each side of the fork tube, and then they can be put to the test. But right now, let's focus on the handlebars. The front end assembly of this motorcycle is just about finished. I have two more parts on this table, the left and the right hand mirror, that will go on either side of the handlebar, and then I'll work my way to the back of the motorcycle. So it looks like I have an issue with the right side mirror, so let me go ahead and explain the differences between the original one and the one that I just purchased over here on this table. On the left side of the table, you'll see the original mirror that came off of the bike, and on the right, you'll see the brand new one that I purchased. I think I ordered this wrong, so please don't bash me about this, but I didn't even look at the old or the original mirror before I purchased this new one. I just made sure the left and the right one are identical, and I didn't even check up on these threads. So yeah, you guys can see this is smaller in diameter. It is also longer. There's a shoulder on the top and there's a lock nut on the bottom. The thread only goes partially in, so this surface can actually seat on the clutch assembly. Now right here, you will notice the thread is also bigger. I believe this is a 10 millimeter thread, a right hand thread, and then the nut is on the top. But yeah, these are different, and I obviously need this style and not this right here. So I'm probably gonna have to get a brand new mirror for the right side. As you guys can tell, I make mistakes too, and today I definitely learned something about the mirrors on the BMW R60/5. I guess with only one mirror on the BMW R60/5 frame assembly, I'm gonna move on to some smaller components. On this table, I have a few more parts that I'd like to install onto the main frame, and the reason why I'm installing all of this right here is so you guys at home have a better overview of all of this. Because some of these brackets might not be visible once the engine is installed. So all of this right here will be mounted right now, and then we'll get to the rear end. As you guys can tell, the rear brake pedal is pivoting just fine. The bore and the pin themselves do not have any wear, so there's just the right amount of clearance for it to pivot freely. Now I'll continue on with the rear frame assembly, and then I'll also work on the swing arm. This right here is the rear frame assembly. As you guys can tell, it is painted and it is ready to go. We have two hookup points on the top end, so this will go up against the main frame. We have one point right here and one opposite of that. Down below we have one more point, and over here one more. So in total we have 4 points. So we have nuts and bolts, we also have some flat washers, and we also have some wave washers on the back end. So 4 of everything in total. Under this bolt, you also want to make sure the grab handle is in place. So this will actually go underneath or between the washer and the frame. So that part will be bolted to the main frame, and this actually has a bolt from the back. So you also want to make sure you tighten this up. Maybe this should be the last thing you want to tighten up, just so you get everything lined up properly. Now let's put this onto the main frame. I mounted the rear frame assembly to the main frame assembly and everything went together super smooth. I also just installed one brand new Icon shock absorber, which is on the left side of the frame. That's because the swing arm only has one pivoting point on the left side and the other side is actually on the final drive. So since I don't have the final drive in this assembly, I can only put on one shock absorber for today. So right now, let's get to the swing arm assembly. Over here on this table, I have the swing arm and the corresponding parts that have to be mounted back into the swing arm. So let's have a look at the swing arm first, so you guys have a better understanding of everything. This right here is actually the front end of the swing arm, and this is the rear end of the swing arm closer to the wheel. Now the front end of the swing arm will be mounted to the main frame by two pivoting points, one pivoting point off to the left and the other one off to the right. This tube is actually for the drive shaft, and this runs all the way through, as you can see. And these two, this one right here and this one actually right here, are actually closed off. On this side, on the right side, we will be installing a taper bearing, and off to the left, we will be installing a taper bearing as well. The left side still needs one part before we install the taper bearing, and that is this little cap. Once we install our taper bearings with grease, which are obviously preloaded, you don't want any of that grease going down into this tube all the way to here, and obviously causing a lack of grease on your taper bearings. So you'll put this cap right here, so the distance is actually just as big, or the space is just as big as the right side. So don't forget that cap as you're installing these brand new taper bearings within your swing arm. The swing arm also has some other features. So off to the left of the swing arm, we also have a pivoting point for our rear shock absorber. That's another reason why I installed the left shock absorber on the rear frame assembly. Off to the left of the swing arm, we also have this clamp. This will clamp up against the axle shaft for the rear wheel. In this space, we will also have our final drive, which will bolt up against the swing arm itself. And that's another reason why I didn't paint this surface. Now I'll show you the parts that I'll be installing. And as I mentioned before, that cap has to be installed onto the left side. The other two components are two taper bearings. This right here is the bearing number by Euromoto Electrics. Two taper bearings. The outer race will be installed first, and then the inner race facing outwards on both sides. And over here, I also have a single lip seal from EME. This will ensure that the taper bearing stays lubed up and that no foreign debris goes into the taper bearings. Another thing to note is that these seals seal up against this thrust sleeve. This thrust sleeve is also another part you don't want to forget, because this will have to be installed prior to installing your seal. Now, this seal will also go up against this surface, so you really want to make sure that this surface is clean and that there are no imperfections on it, or else that will also damage your single lip seal. Your thrust sleeve will actually go up against your pin just like this. This is your pivot pin. This surface will go into your inner race of your bearing. Your thrust sleeve will be placed just the way I have it right now. This side of your thrust sleeve will go towards your taper bearing, and that side will go towards your thread. We also have a locking nut on the outside, which will ensure a tight fit on your main frame. So let's get to the assembly process. The pivoting points have been installed on the swing arm. Now I'll move forward to the drive shaft assembly. Now when we look at the drive shaft, it's actually a loose rotating assembly within the swing arm. The swing arm only offers support to the final drive, and it also connects to the main frame. So the drive shaft itself is actually connected on one end to the output flange of the transmission, and on the other end it is connected to the final drive with a coupler. Here I'll give you guys a close-up view on the drive shaft. This right here is the splined coupler that mates up against the drive shaft with a tapered fit. And to connect everything together, we have a hex nut with a machined flat surface. According to the service manual, this nut has to be torqued to the drive shaft. The torque specifications are 173 to 188 foot-pounds of torque. Before we torque this down to the drive shaft, the drive coupler has to be on there. The surfaces have to be perfectly clean. I will be cleaning them with acetone. And we have to apply red Loctite to this thread. As I mentioned earlier, this drive shaft is a loose assembly within the swing arm. Now, if I want to go torque down the nut, which has a very high torque spec, it will rotate the drive shaft on me. Now, to combat the rotation of the drive shaft, I made this custom board, which has the exact same hole pattern as this flange on the drive shaft. Now, this flange has 8.2 millimeter holes, I believe. Therefore, 8 millimeter bolts, obviously. But if you want to, you can use 1/4-inch bolts, which will work just fine. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bolt down this drive shaft to the board, and I'm going to feed the bolts through and make sure everything is tight. Right after that, I can clamp this to a table, and hopefully, as I torque everything to spec, this won't rotate on me. If this doesn't work, I'll have to find a different solution, but if it does work, you guys can probably try this at home for yourself. So let's put this to the test. I'm back from the other table, and the drive shaft is now fully torqued within the swing arm. The board that I custom made to hold the drive shaft actually held up. I'm quite surprised because 180 foot-pounds of torque is pretty high, at least in my opinion. But now I'll remove this and start to assemble the swing arm on the main frame. So let's get right to it. With the swing arm in place, the rear of this motorcycle frame is already looking much more complete. The shock absorber is held on by one bolt on the bottom of the swing arm, and also the two pivoting pins are pushing up against the tapered bearings on the inside. But there's still one more thing we have to do, and that is align the swing arm within the main frame, and we also have to torque down the pivot pins and the nuts that hold everything together. To do that, I have some specialty tools on this bench over here, and I'll share them with you guys right now. Over here, I have tools laid out that will help me tighten the pivot pin itself and also the nuts that are on the pivot pin. So on the left, we have exactly 2 torque wrenches. One is a smaller one that goes up to 20 Newton meter, and then one from 20 to 100 Newton meter. We will need 2 different torque specs for this setup, so just take in consideration you probably will need one small one and one bigger one. Now I also have a ratchet which is hooked up to the exact same tool that I have in the smaller torque wrench, and this is a 6 millimeter Allen socket. So I have one on here, and I also have one over here. I'll just be using these 2 tools. Now over here in the middle, I have 27 millimeter sockets. This is actually a specialty thin wall socket. This was a little bit too big in diameter, so I went ahead and made a custom tool. As you guys can see, it has been machined down. This right here is a 1/2 inch long, and it is also just a little bit smaller in diameter. I believe it's 24.8 millimeters. And then over here, I made sure I can grab it with a 1 1/8 wrench, and this would be 29 millimeters roughly. So that can actually go right on that wrench on the open end part, and then I can tighten the pivot pin nut while holding the pivot pin itself with an Allen T-handle. Now with all those tools, I'll get to work on the pivot pins. I finished off this frame assembly by torquing the pivot pin nuts to spec, and now the swing arm can move up and down freely, and the left and the right movement is very minimal because there's only a very little amount of play. As you guys can tell, there are still so many parts that have to go back onto this BMW motorcycle frame. The transmission is already rebuilt and it's just waiting to go back onto this frame. It's in the shelf right now. The engine rebuild is coming very soon. I've received a shipping update and the parts are finally in Canada. So hopefully this week or this coming week, I will be getting those parts to start the engine assembly. I know you guys are waiting for it. I've been patient and I hope you guys have been too. There are still a couple more parts that I have on the shelf that are ready to go, like the wheel hubs. The front wheel hub could be laced to the outer rim, and the rear wheel hub still needs a drive dog. But I still need to make some custom tooling for myself, and I also have to share with you guys how you guys can do that. So it will take some time to do that, but don't worry, I will have some videos here very soon. So I really want to make sure I have some sub-assemblies done, and then they will go back onto this motorcycle, and then hopefully it will start taking shape, and then we'll only need a few more details until this thing can fire up. So if you guys enjoyed this video, I'd really appreciate it if you hit the like button down below. If you guys have any questions or concerns about what I did in this video, please leave a comment down below and I'll try and get back to you as best as I can. And if you guys would like to see upcoming videos like the engine rebuild, please hit that subscribe button down below, because then you will be one of the first to be notified when I upload that video. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys in an upcoming video.